Chapter 11. A sharp about turn. Returning to the ship after my 3-day stay with Anastasia, it was some time before I was in a frame of mind to take charge of company business. At first, I was unable either to decide on the ship's next destination or answer the many radiograms coming in from Novosibirsk. And the hired workers, and even some of my crew, apparently sensed my inattention to the daily routine and began stealing. They were arrested by the police from Surgut, the town where the ship was docked, working with my bodyguards, and detention papers were drawn up. But even this was not something I felt like delving into at the time. It's hard to say at the time my talks with Anastasia had such a strong effect on me. Before this, my firm had received many visits from representatives of all sorts of religious denominations. They claimed they wanted to do something good for society and always asked for money. Sometimes I would oblige just so they would go away, without looking too deeply into the cause they were collecting for. And what was the point of asking them more questions if the conversation always ended up with a request for money? In contrast to all these so-called religious people, Anastasia never asked for money. In any case, I couldn't even imagine what I could give her. Outwardly it seemed she had nothing, and yet I gradually got the impression that she had everything. I gave orders for the ship to proceed full speed to Novosibirsk and hold myself away in my cabin to think. My more than 10 years of experience in business and team management had taught me a lot. The highs and lows I had gone through had given me the skills I needed to seek and find a way out of all sorts of tricky situations. This time, however, I felt I was at rock bottom. All the troubles imaginable came upon me simultaneously. The failure of the firm appeared imminent. One of the so-called well-wishers had already started a rumor, now increasing in currency, that something had happened to me and that I was no longer capable of making sound business decisions. So, people concluded, it was sauve qui paye, every man for himself, and that's exactly what happened. Upon my return, I saw how people were saving themselves. Even my relatives had their hand in it, pilfering what they could from the company. It's all going to go broke anyway. They figured. There was just one small group of my longtime employees who had tried to withstand the onslaught. But after the arrival of the lead ship, upon seeing what kind of literature I had my nose into, even they became about my mental state. I had a clear and sober perspective on what was happening. I was fully aware that I was no longer in any position to manage this team effectively. Even those I had earlier trusted as my tried and true supporters were now starting to cast doubt upon any decision I took. Even though I very much wanted to tell everyone who would listen about Anastasia, it hardly seemed possible to count on anybody's understanding. It might even land me in the loony bin. My family was already starting to talk about what kind of treatment I needed. Without saying so in so many words, those around me were demanding I get back down to earth and come up with a business plan, and a successful one at that. They dismissed my latest distraction as either madness or a nervous breakdown. I had begun thinking about all sorts of things in this life of ours. What's going on here? I thought. You hustle through one commercial operation and even earn big money, but where's the satisfaction? You immediately want more. And it's been going on like that for over 10 years now. Where's the guarantee that this race won't my whole life long without so much as a whiff of satisfaction? One person gets upset because he doesn't have enough money for a bottle of vodka. A billionaire gets upset because he doesn't have enough for some major acquisition or another. Maybe it's not the amount of money that counts? One morning, two old acquaintances of mine, both entrepreneurs in charge of big commercial firms, came to see me at my office. I started talking with them about setting up a commonwealth of pure-minded entrepreneurs and about the purpose and goals of our business activities. After all, I just had to share all this with somebody. They played along, nodding now and then in agreement. It was a long conversation, and I ended up thinking to myself, can it be that they grasped it? They did spend a lot of time discussing it, after all. Later my driver told me, you know, Vladimir Nikolaevich, they were asked to come and see you. About your health. They wanted to know what you've been preoccupied with all this time, what's been on your mind. In short, to make sure you haven't lost your mind. They wanted to know whether they should call in a psychiatrist or simply wait and let it pass. He fell silent for a while and then said quietly, for 10 years your work's gone along just great. Many in the city have said you're a successful businessman. But now all your employees are afraid they may be left without a paycheck. It was only then I realized the extent of people's concern about me, and I said to the driver, turn the car around. I went back to the office. I called an emergency staff meeting. I appointed supervisors for the company's various activities and gave them full authority to act in my absence. I then told the driver to pick me up early the next morning and take me to the airport. Just as I was about to go date, he handed me something wrapped in a towel. It was I asked, what is it? Parashki. So, you're giving me these out of compassion for a crazy person, eh? They're from my wife, Vladimir Nikolaevich. She couldn't sleep and baked all night. She's never baked anything before, she's still a pretty young woman, but last night she plunged right in. She insisted I give them to you. She wrapped them in a towel, they were still warm. She says, you won't be back for a while. If you come back at all. This is goodbye. All right. Then. Thank you very much. He resigned from the firm a few Chapter 12. Who sets the course? Seated on the airplane, I closed my eyes. The plane's course was set with precision. It was headed for Moscow. The course of the rest of my life was still to be set. But I was thinking more about entrepreneurs. Many people today still tend to regard entrepreneurs as people who are constantly working out business deals, having amassed their initial capital by some illegal means and multiplying it at the expense of those around them. Naturally, just as in any other segment of our society, there are entrepreneurs and then there are entrepreneurs. However, having been right at the center of entrepreneurial life in our country from the very beginning of perestroika, I can tell the majority of the first wave of post-communist entrepreneurs made their initial capital by looking for unorthodox solutions for producing new merchandise or goods which had been in short supply, and finding more efficient ways of structuring manufacturing operations. It was a peculiar characteristic of Soviet and Russian entrepreneurs to make money from scratch, i.e., starting with nothing, not even credit. After all, the first wave of entrepreneurs had no access to privatized factories that the next wave enjoyed. They had to fly by the seat of their pants and hope they would be lucky. And they did make money from scratch. By way of proof, let me cite an example. Chapter 13. Money from scratch. Back before Perestroika, I was in charge of a small unit in a photographic collective. It included lab technicians and several roving photographers. Everyone had both a salary and additional perks, which allowed us to make a fairly decent living for the time. Each member of our unit received a percentage of the total profits. Naturally, we wanted more. But for that, we had to find more. I managed to hit upon a solution. Anyone who wishes is free to copy it, even today. One day while I was traveling on a highway in my hump-backed Zaporozhets, I got a tire puncture. While getting the tire repaired, I watched the cars passing by one after another and thought to myself, if only we could give all these drivers a chance to have their photo taken, there would be huge profits to be made. It took but a few minutes to formulate a plan of action in my head, a plan whose realization in practice would soon quadruple our unit's profits. It worked this way. One of our photographers would stand at the side of the highway with a camera. He had two assistants with green armbands bearing the SB2 insignia and brandishing batons like those used by the traffic police. Motorists would stop, thinking it was the green or some other patrol. Point 3 Upon learning that it was simply a photo service being offered and that nobody was about to pounce on them or fine them or inspect their vehicle, drivers were happy to stand in front of their car, next to the license plate, and have their picture taken. They gave the addresses where they would like the photos to be sent COD. The license plate had to be showing just in case there was a mix-up in the addresses. We ended up offering this service on all the major highways leading to Novosibirsk over 6 months. Then more and more we started encountering motorists who had already used the service. But during these 6 months, our unit managed to realize a fairly decent income. Later I thought of starting a photo campaign to take pictures of residential houses, adding postcard phrases like, "I live here," "Home sweet home," etc. People from our unit took pictures of thousands of houses. The demand turned out. It got so that the photographers didn't bother asking which residents wanted it. They would simply walk along and take pictures of every house on the street. A few days later the postal service would deliver the photos to each dwelling and collect payment. People would send these snapshots to their children. Many said the pictures inspired the kids to come home for a visit. Before long the collective started having problems paying the members of our unit their salaries which, in the opinion of the management of the day, had exceeded all reasonable bounds. But there was little they could do about it since everyone in the collective was entitled to an equal share of their unit's profit. During the early days of Perestroika, our unit detached itself from the collective and formed an independent cooperative. I was chosen as its first chairman. This way we enjoyed greater freedom of movement. We had the opportunity to gather some seed money together and expand the scope of our operations. I began to think about new ventures to increase company profits. One day I happened to have a conversation with an acquaintance of mine who worked at the Institute of Theoretical and Applied Mechanics. He was complaining that wages were being delayed or not paid at all and that the lab unit was being threatened with dissolution. Where could they go? What could they do? They weren't needed by anyone, it seemed. What did your lab do before? I asked him. We made Nobody needs it anymore. What was it used for? All sorts of things, he replied. He took a piece of black tape out of his pocket and handed it to me. See for yourself, he said. I took the piece in my hand, and all at once it turned green as I fingered it. I even threw it on the ground. What of junk is that? It turns green. Now I've got to wash my hands, I told him. To which he replied, don't worry, it simply changed color from the warmth of your hand. It's supposed to react to changes in temperature. If the temperature of your hands had been above normal, it would have turned red. The green color indicates a normal temperature. The concept took off quickly. Our company began producing flat thermometers and stress indicators. A piece of the tape was stuck onto a sheet of cardboard with bright colored squares, each with a number beside it indicating degrees of temperature, and, presto! A new product was born. We had it distributed through the State Warehouse Agency to many regions of the old Soviet Union. This was before the collapse of the USSR in 1991. Our production staff increased, and everyone made a fairly decent living. Our seed capital was growing. The lab also came out of the red, since a share of the profits accrued to the institute. Our cooperative acquired new equipment along with 2 vehicles. And then something happened which gave us an incredible boost. One afternoon I arrived at the company office and noticed both our telephones were in use. My secretary was on one of them, listening and taking notes. The other telephone was being manned by the cleaning lady. No sooner had one of the phones been hung up than it started ringing again. At one point my secretary managed to tell me, they've been ringing off the hook for over 2 hours already. One call after another non-stop. Everybody's asking for our thermometers and stress indicators. One fellow cursed us, calling us pre-perestroika dimwits. If we were willing to raise our prices, he said, he would buy them from us wholesale at a higher price. They're all placing bulk orders. They're even ready to give us advance deposits. During the early days of perestroika in our country, if you remember, there was quite a proliferation of manufactured kitsch on the market, plastic clip-on earrings, posters, and calendars featuring semi-nude girls. Everyone snapped these things up like crazy. Against that background, what we produced looked like a super novelty. But after 6 months of production, sales suddenly took off with a bang. Something had happened, but what? It turned out that on a TV broadcast the previous night, Foreign Affairs correspondent Vladimir Megre was commenting on how innovative the Japanese were, and showed a Japanese stress indicator as an example. It looked just like ours. It was then that I realized for the first time the power of advertising, the nature of this beast called luck. Our staff began working 3 shifts a day round the clock. We hired workers to do the packing, trimming, and finishing in their own homes. Profits steadily increased. We acquired a small passenger ship. I also decided to manufacture seeding equipment for independent farmers. Ordered a large cruise ship to organize business tours and trade expeditions to the regions of the Russian far north. Chapter 14. A destructive force. As head of my very own cooperative, I got to know firsthand what a destructive force, one capable of crushing any material state of well-being, impatience toward each other and the breakdown of mutual understanding can be. Later I learned that this is the very reason behind the failure of many collectives. And it can all start over a trifle. Indeed, that's how it happened with my first cooperative. Not only was it torn apart itself, but several families were destroyed in the process. Even today I still don't know how to counteract this force which erupts spontaneously and is not subject to common sense. It all began when I decided to procure for our firm a country house with its estate. I entrusted the details to our acting inventory and supply manager Alexei Mishunin. He drew up all the necessary sale purchase documents, while I went to take a look at the property. It included a large house, a fifth of a hectare of land, a bathhouse, a garage, and a greenhouse. We even got a cow and a flock of sheep in the bargain. Not exactly a priority, but Mishunin said the owners had to go away and mill everything all at once. There was feed for the cow, and he had already arranged for a woman from the village to come in and do the milking. A couple of days later I called a meeting of the members of the cooperative to tell them about our acquisition. I explained it was intended for entertaining guests, as well as being a place where the members of the cooperative could relax and celebrate special occasions. We would all have to work together to fix up the place, do some renovations, and modernize the kitchen. The male half of the cooperative greeted the idea with great enthusiasm. But the women began whispering among themselves. It wasn't clear who the ringleader was, but my wife took on the role of spokesperson, saying the men had overstepped all recognized bounds of decency for the women. "We work with you as equals here," she declared. "After that, we go home every day and clean the house, cook meals, and take care of the children." Does that seem trifling to you? And now you want us, in addition to all that, to work our asses off at this country house of yours, do renovations, and then be cooks and waitresses for your receptions and drinking parties? That was when all hell broke loose. The women poured out on the men all their personal and family grievances and other pet peeves. I realized this when one of them cried out, "All you do is fool around with dominoes and stare at the tube the whole evening long." I knew that none of the men at the cooperative played dominoes. It was her husband, a firefighter, who played. He didn't even work for us. But wives of the cooperative workers were especially pissed off. One of them stupidly blurted out to her husband in front of everyone, "You always smell of sweat and cheap cigarettes." He was especially fond of the Prima brand. "And now you're going to be smelling of cow dung too?" A silence hung over the room. The husband took a deep gulp of air, blushed, and retorted, "I shall especially smell cow dung. Especially so that you won't come near me, you slut." At this, she burst into tears. The women gathered around to console her. And it made them even more pissed off. They are hurling all sorts of insults. Workers was named Zhenya Kolpakov. He'd invented all sorts of devices to increase productivity and could fix anything that needed fixing. But now they told him, "We have inventors here, but it takes a whole year to clean up after them." Then the discussion turned to politics. Gorbachev goes on television, but it's Raisa Maximovna who makes all the decisions. I declared a recess. I thought everyone somehow might come to their senses. After the break they all took their seats again, the outward restraint barely masking the inner tension. Once again, my wife spoke in the name of the women. With a contrived tranquility she threw out a venomous ultimatum. "Of course, if you want a country residence, go ahead, but not one of us women will step foot in it. In other words, it'll be yours alone. And since we share our funds in common and you have no right to spend them without our consent, as compensation we demand you give us one of the company cars with a driver, especially for our household use. We'll take turns using it. Great, came a chorus of male voices. Go ahead and choke yourselves. We'll give you anything you like as long as you promise not to show up there. They're bound to find some farm hussies out there, one of the women observed. Let them look, retorted another. That hussies soon make themselves scarce. Who needs? None of the men whose wives worked at the cooperative went home that night. It was Friday, and we headed out to our hacienda. We took a good look around and started making plans for settling in. The next day we heated the bathhouse. At Mishunen's request, the village woman came to milk the cow. How she did it. It was a pleasant time. The cow was quiet, not restless. She was ours now. The woman advised that she wouldn't always be able to come to do the milking. We'd need to look up somebody else. After an early evening cleansing at the bathhouse, we cooked ourselves supper. It turned out we had quite a feast. Mishunen fried some fish. We put out bottles of beer and vodka and sat down at the table. And all at once, M0000. It was the cow. We got up and headed for the barn. It was milking time, and there was no milkmaid around. We stood there, 8 men, in front of the cow and had no idea what to do. In any case, who can explain what sometimes happens to people at the sight of an animal? You live your life day after day without the slightest thought for non-human creatures, and then all at once you find yourself in a situation where one of them's in your home. A cat, or a dog, or some other animal, and you find you have the same kind of feelings come over you that you'd have in the presence of a child. You're nervous, you worry. Why is that? Maybe it's true that the first man, Adam, when God gave him the job of naming all the creatures, looked upon each one with love. And this love is something we've all inherited. It hides for the most part deep down inside us and makes an appearance only from time to time. Nobody can say for certain whether that's true or not. Only each one of us, I'm telling you, had some sort of feeling for that cow, and I'm positive it felt something for us, too. And this is what came out of it. Seryoza Kodakov said. The milk's likely bursting her udder. We've got to do something. We started in pestering Mishu. Why on earth, we said, did you buy a cow? And yet at the same time, we felt bad about selling it. It had only been 1 day, but we had somehow taken to it like one of our own. The cow looked at us with her sorrowful eyes, silently. Then she stretched her head out toward me and let out a loud, M0000. She was mooing so pleadingly, and I told Mishunen, better get to the milking right away since you were the one who bought her. Mishunen quickly fetched the milk pail, tied the kerchief around his head, the kerchief the milkmaid had left behind, and climbed into the cow's stall. He asked us not to leave, as God knows what this cow might do. She let him approach and start milking her. We brought the cow some water to drink, put fresh hay into her stall, and gave her some bread. Mishunen went on milking. At first, he wasn't very successful. Very thin streams of milk came out and even they sometimes missed the pail. But then it got a little better. After 15 minutes the milk was still coming. Mishunin said, whispering for some reason. Sweat. My sweat's getting in the way. We gathered up handkerchiefs from whoever had them, and Seryoza Kodakov climbed into the stall to wipe the perspiration from Alexei's forehead. He squatted down beside him to see how the milking was going, from time to time wiping the sweat from Alexei's face. And suddenly we could hear Seryoza's agitated whisper. What are you doing? You're hurting her. You've got a good stream coming from your right hand, but only a third of that from your left. You can permanently damage her udder that way. My fingers, Mishunin whispered. It's 'cause my fingers have gone numb on my left hand. Maybe you'd better help. Seryoza Kodakov approached the cow from the other side and they began milking together simultaneously. After half an hour, maybe more, they had milked a whole pailful. That night at supper we drank fresh milk, and I swear it was the best tasting milk we'd ever had in our lives. Early the next morning we were awakened by the milkmaid, who told us with some astonishment that she had tried milking the cow that morning, but for some unknown reason, the cow wouldn't let her anywhere close to her. Once again we trotted off to the barn. We did everything just the way we had the night before, and the cow started milking. Well, ain't that the limit? Exclaimed the woman. Since the cow seems to like you so much, you can milk her from now on. Happens that way, you know. A cow can let some people come close, but others she jolly well won't. Our cow, it turned out, was quite picky. Not only did she not let maids near her, but whenever she was milked, she demanded that one of us stand by her muzzle and feed her, and talk to her, while the milking had to be a joint effort on the part of two men together. That meant 3 of us had to go for each milking session. So that's how we drew up the schedule, 3 at a time. At least until we sold the cow, we thought. But it wasn't long before the rumors about our picky cow began flying around. Buyers would come and try milking her themselves, and nothing happened. And they'd take her, even for a pittance. Granted, I did make one condition, that she wasn't to be slaughtered for meat. We called in a veterinarian, and he told us, that does happen, fellows. An animal gets used to someone and may reject others for a long time. But tell me, what on earth possessed you to domesticate her that way? He didn't have any real advice to offer us, apart from telling us that our cow was calving, meaning she was pregnant. When the time came we would have to prepare for the birthing. The vet indicated the approximate date. We would know when the time was near when she stopped giving milk. Since the men were obliged to keep watch 3 at once, we ended up spending a lot of time at our hacienda, even staying overnight there. Our wives had a hard time accepting that we were having problems with the cow since they had sworn never to set foot in our hacienda themselves and looked upon this whole story of the cow as a convenient excuse. The women and wives working at the cooperative completely lost all sense of self-control. They started telling obscene jokes. The one who complained about her husband's bad smell said, "Only a sexual pervert could attract such a perverted cow." To which he retorted, "I'd rather spend my whole life milking a silent cow than listening to your dumb remarks." Soon afterward he moved out completely to live in the hacienda, and later got a divorce from his wife. He married a young country girl with a child and became quite a decent farmer. Then the day came when the cow stopped giving milk. On the vet's advice, we got everything ready for the birthing. But the cow gave birth all by herself and without incident. She bore a little bull calf, a handsome son of a gun. When we called the vet, he took one look at the pair and said, "Well, that's great. Nothing more to be done here. She's taken care of it all by herself. Just keep the place clean. Make sure she's well." Sometime later we managed to find a good home for both the cow and her bull calf. One day we went over to see what a handsome creature he'd turned into, our little bull. And everything was arranged nicely for his mother. Even now I still think of her. I wonder whether she remembers us. But while we got things settled for the cow, we managed to restore a sense of harmony and mutual understanding in the cooperative. So I ended up dividing the cooperative in two, reorganizing part of it under a different name. I began using the chartered ship to make long trading voyages to the north along the River Ob. In between such voyages, I conducted business cruises for Russian and foreign entrepreneurs. I took the lesson home that one indispensable condition of success, among others, is a sense of mutual understanding and respect in a collective. You must have faith not only in your abilities but in everyone's. Any kind of ability you have is multiplied by your faith in the people around you.